the last video, we took a brand new illustration inspired by Wind in the Willows from concept through to line art. In this video, we're going to create the finished art piece for this. So let's get cracking. So pleased with that as a start. Let's do the foreground, then we'll probably do the characters last and then see how it all fits together. So super quick getting down the idea for what the foreground elements will be doing. And in my initial idea, they were going to just be almost silhouette-y, like to help establish these different layers through the composition. So I'll just sit with that for the time being and see how that looks. At the moment, it's kind of working in my head as I anticipated. You'll see that I've been creating clipping masks in Procreate. They are layers above another layer that are constrained to only paint within the confines of what was on the layer underneath, which is why in the last video I spent a fair bit of time filling in white into the different spaces, just because it allows me to quickly drop colour in without it bleeding outside of the edges of the different parts of the composition. So you would have seen that I was able to paint really quickly into the foreground elements there without it bleeding into the water and the characters behind. So it's a real great way to save time by investing a little bit of that effort in the first stage. So let's get on to the more important, or the all-important stage of getting the characters and the boat done. So at the moment, the colours that I've chosen for all of the other elements are quite bright, they're quite saturated. I think in the end what I'll do is drop them right back so that they're not competing too much with our characters and the characters can really stand out. Let's see how it goes. So this is all coming together quite quickly. And it can happen that way sometimes. I'm just sort of feeling out the colours as I imagine them in my head in the first place, but I'm also just picking some colours. You'll see me dropping my finger down and sampling colours either from the reference illustration or just from other colours that I'm using, and letting that become part of the palette for this illustration. I find it's nice to continually resample colours that you're using throughout so that you don't end up with too wide and discordant a colour palette. But right now I'm looking at it, I'm still thinking it's pretty bright and saturated, but that's okay. I'll get the chance to play with that a little bit more in the next few stages. But I'm happy at the moment, and I think what's probably next is I'll start to add in the shadows and the highlights, and let that dictate where we go to from here. So that's all of the shadow layers down now, starting to come together quite nicely, and set the different layers in the composition starting to separate out from each other as the shadows start to inform a little bit more about where everything is sitting. So let's move on to the highlight stage, and once we get to the end of that, we can have a bit of a breather, walk away, maybe have a cup of tea, and then come back and have a look at it with some fresh eyes. Yeah, wouldn't be a video these days without Barney wanting to say hello. That's the highlights added. Again, separate layers for each of the different layers in the composition. Clipping mask, this time setting the blending mode to soft light and just using pretty light tone and just brushing it in. Thinking about where the light is striking each of the objects in the composition. It's a really fun stage, adding highlights, and definitely can go overboard sometimes. So I feel like this is a good place to stop. It's fairly subtle, the highlights and the shadows in this case, because I think it's kind of working at the moment. I don't want to push it too hard and break it. There will always be tweaking. As I said, I'll go and have a cup of tea now, and I'll come back to it and have another look, and there's no doubt there'll be some things I'll notice, some things that I'll want to change. I'm less convinced about the saturation at this point, but I am aware that it does stand out against the last illustration in this little series that I'm doing, Toad Goes Touring, which is definitely a lot less saturated and dropped back. So we'll just see whether or not that's where I want to take it as well. There's also a scratchy kind of texture that I've added to the Toad Goes Touring that I might try on this one just to see what it looks like. Just adds a little bit of roughness to the image, makes it look a little bit more antique, but it might not need it. But that's the beauty of doing this digitally, is I can switch these things on and off. I can try them, and if they don't work, I can discard them without destroying anything necessarily that's underneath. Okay, cup of tea time. We'll come back and have a look at where we need to go to get this to the finished stage. So here's the finished piece, well, at least finished for now. I can't rule out going back and doing a little bit more tweaking somewhere down the line, but you'll see that I have dropped the background elements right back. Done that by dropping the saturation down. In Procreate, there's a great way to just change the saturation sliders. And I also put the alpha lock on the line art for the background elements. And when you put the alpha lock on, that means that you cannot paint outside of anything that's on that layer. So it's a really easy way to quickly paint in a different color for the lines. So lines were originally black, but because they're background elements, you don't want them too black to stand out. So I just dropped them down to a sort of a nice warmish neutral grey. And immediately that pushes the elements right back in the composition, or certainly helps with that. All of the other color layers, I've also dropped the saturation down, and this, I think, partially adds to the harmony of the colors, but also brings it more in line with what I was trying to get, which is this more oldie worldy, antique style coloring that was not too different from the Toad Goes Touring illustration. And so there's lots of fun things to explore in here. I really like the way the water has sort of turned out now, and little highlights just dropped in here and there to accentuate the characters in the boat. One of the things that really helped with that was dropping the image down to a very small size and then just seeing how it reads, and I noticed the characters weren't standing out quite as much as I wanted them to, so I went back in and added a few more highlights that brought it onto their faces and the back of their back of Raddy's jacket in particular, and I think that helps in certainly in the thumbnail stage of making those characters stand out a bit more. So that's my quick creative process for colouring digitally these sorts of illustrations that I'm working on at the moment. Love to hear anybody else's stories about how they do their own colouring process and their digital art process. I'm an art process junkie, so I would love to hear if you're doing something similar, or if this is something that you'd like to try. Or if you've got any feedback about things that I can be doing differently, there's probably a whole bunch of things I could be doing differently that might be even more efficient or create more pop. Love to hear from you. That'll do for this week's video. So a simple pleasure this week is having somebody cook for you. Last night I had the most amazing homemade pizzas with handmade dough, lovingly crafted, shared with friends. And it was an absolute pleasure that I'm extremely grateful for. I don't know what the plan for the next video is, but I hope you are enjoying what you're seeing so far, that you're getting something out of it, that it might stimulate you to be creative in your own way, or at least even think about talking about being creative. That counts. I look forward to putting something together for our journey together. See you next time.